Did you know that one of history's most extraordinary military victories didn't come from overwhelming force, but through faith, obedience, and just 300 men? This is the story of Gideon, a man chosen by God to defeat an army as vast as the sands of the sea. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Our story begins in Judges chapter 6. For 7 long years, the Midianites oppressed the Israelites. Crops were stolen, livestock taken, families driven into hiding in caves and mountains. God's people were desperate. In their despair, they cried out to the Lord for help. And God answered. God decides to use Gideon, not a warrior, not a leader, just a farmer, threshing wheat in a winepress, hiding from the Midianites. But then an angel of the Lord appeared to him with an astonishing declaration. "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon's response: doubt. He asked, "If the Lord is with us, why has all this happened? Where are all the wonders our ancestors told us about?" But God didn't back down. He said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" Still, Gideon hesitated. He asked for signs again and again. A burnt offering consumed by fire, a fleece wet with dew while the ground stayed dry. Then the reverse. Through it all, God patiently reassured him. Finally, Gideon stepped into his calling. With God's call confirmed, Gideon gathered an army of 32,000 men, small compared to the Midianite horde, but a start. Then God gave a shocking instruction. "You have too many men." Too many? Why? Because if you win with this many, Israel might think it was by their own strength. So God thinned the ranks. First, Gideon told anyone afraid to go home. 22,000 men left that day. Only 10,000 remained. But God wasn't done. He said, "Take them to the water, and I'll separate them for you." Those who lapped water like dogs were set apart from those who knelt to drink. Only 300 men lapped. And God said, "With these 300 men, I will save you." Now imagine this. Gideon and his 300 men stood against an enemy described as thick as locusts, with camels that couldn't even be counted. God, knowing Gideon's lingering fear, gave him one more reassurance. He told Gideon to sneak into the Midianite camp. There, Gideon overheard 2 soldiers talking. One described a dream. A loaf of barley bread tumbled into their camp and overturned a tent. The other replied, "This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. God has given the Midianites into his hands." That was all Gideon needed. Strengthened, he returned to his men, ready to carry out God's plan. At night, Gideon divided his 300 men into 3 groups. Each man carried not a sword, but a trumpet, an empty jar, and a torch inside the jar. At Gideon's signal, they blew their trumpets, smashed their jars, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The Midianites were thrown into chaos. The sound, the lights, the confusion, it terrified them. In their panic, they turned on each other and fled. Not a single sword was raised by Gideon's men. God delivered Israel that day. This story isn't about military strategy. It's about faith. Gideon's 300 remind us that God doesn't need large numbers or extraordinary people to achieve his purposes. He uses the willing, the obedient, and those who trust him. Are you feeling outnumbered? Overwhelmed by the battles in your life? Remember this: victory doesn't depend on your strength, but on God's power. Trust him. He will fight for you. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men who lapped, I will deliver you and give the Midianites into your hands." Judges 7:7.